ahead and begin with a webinar series. This is the first of 4 that COE will be having regarding data, how best to use it, and how other practitioners are using data as well. So today, our featured presenter is Robert Vassar, otherwise known as Robbie to many of you, who has spent several years, and when I say several, over 14 years working with TRIO staff and folks over the issue of data and technology. And you may find Robbie to be a familiar face because prior to jumping on board the COE team, he was at many annual conferences, and you actually may have had Robbie as your Bloomin representative. So before we begin, I'd like to just go over a couple of housekeeping announcements. I am going to ask you to reserve any questions for the Q&A box. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, it's right next to the chat icon. Please do not put questions either for the presenter, for COE, anything like that in the chat box. Reserve the chat box for maybe a comment or I don't know, hey, we can't hear you. But please, if you have questions about the content, about anything that Robbie's presenting, please put it in the Q&A box, which is accessible at the bottom of your screen, right next to the chat icon. So we've built in some question and answer time. So about 25 minutes in, Robbie, if that's good for you, we'll have our first break. And in that break, if there are any questions in the box, or if you just want to run up and get a glass of water, I know I will, we can do that at that time. If you have any questions before Robbie begins, please go right ahead and put it in the Q&A, because I'm looking at it right at this moment. It looks like we've got nothing. So without much further ado, Robbie.
Hello, Trio. It's a little different Zooming versus the in-person conferences. I think I'd prefer in-person conferences, but here we are, Zooming. And as Patricia, I also would like to thank you, Patricia, for such a great introduction. As Patricia mentioned, I have been working with you guys for many years in a database capacity. I have over 25 plus years of IT experience in databases and things like that. In my 14 years of working with you guys, I've learned databases is not your favorite forte, so to speak. It's not something really anyone likes to do, is entering data. But it doesn't have to be bad. It can be fun. And when you see what the information you can get from the data, that should motivate you to enter the data. So let's get started with the best practices in database management. And for those who didn't get to hear my nice little song, I'm gonna play it again before we get started. This is my elevator music. It calms me down. It's like my beach background. So anyways, okay, enough of that. All right, so let's get started. The objective of this webinar is to gain a better understanding on database queries, how to measure performance of your grant using data entry tips, and understand why a properly configured database is very important. That last bullet item, I can't stress that enough. Every database, I'm familiar with all of them, they do require configuration. I can't tell you how to do it in your database because I don't know how, but you would contact your tech support and just ask them to go over the configuration and make sure it's configured properly. I'll talk more about this later, obviously. All right, so let's get started with the next slide. Terminology you will hear. Data set, data points, and fields. That all means the same thing. In IT, we have a word 4 or 5 words that all mean the same thing. It can get confusing. Drop downs, pull down menus are all the same thing. A query is a request for a particular collection of data in a database. The criteria, that's the conditions that control which records display in a query. So the criteria is, you'll hear that throughout the webinar. It's also very important when we're dealing with queries. All right. Why must we use a database? Because when I started, there was not a whole lot of grants using databases. They were primarily using notepads and scribbling stuff down on paper, and that's kind of how you guys tracked your data. Then Department of Ed decided to get a little bit more strict on database or data reporting, and then databases took off. So why must we use a database? TRIO grants are data-driven. Data is your proof that your grant rocks. APR submission PE points is how the Department of Education grades a TRIO grant during the 5-year grant cycle. Data is linked to the success of a TRIO grant. So let's look beyond APR and PE points, because there's a lot more you can learn from your data. Now, in IT, in my 25 plus years of IT, we have a saying, without data, all you have is an opinion. So if you want to prove your grant is doing well, show me your data. Database allows you to make informed decisions. Do we need to add more counselors? Do we need to add more tutors? Database allows you to catch a participant before he or she falls through the cracks. The falls through the cracks. I've heard that many, many times in trainings. Student fell through the cracks. Well, what does that mean, fell through the cracks? It means the student wasn't contacted. It means the student dropped your grant. Why did the student drop the grant? Well, the student didn't feel like they were being contacted or whatever. It's something that, you know, you guys need to make sure you do. A database allows you to submit your APR in less time than doing it manually. And that is the main reason you want to use a database. I don't know about you guys, but APRs are not fun. So let's not drag this on. Let's get this submitted and done as quickly as possible. So this is why you guys want to use a database, or that's why you must use a database. All right. First objective is queries. I love queries. Queries allows you to select data from specific fields. So have you ever needed to see a list of participants based on certain information? Let me move this thing out of my way. Like the same grade level, all attend the same school, or you could use a query to get this information. Think of a query like driving a car. You, the driver, must tell the car where to go by using the steering wheel. In a query, you, the database person, must tell the database what you want by selecting options in a pull-down list, producing the output. How can a query be useful? It allows counselors to find participants based on predetermined criteria, like last contact date, school, grade level. It allows you to isolate a group of participants for updating a certain field, like counselor, like school. Also, you can use queries to select students to update APR fields. There's a lot of APR fields that you can use to update. Allows you to add group events, group services, or group contacts. This is a huge time saver. Queries can be used to work on the APR, as I mentioned earlier. Now, when I was doing support calls for another company, for Bloomin', I got a call from this lady who was entering group contacts. I'll never forget this call because she was entering group contacts for a fairly large number of students. Let's just say 25, 30. And she was entering the contacts one student at a time. Well, at least she had, so the smarts to call tech support and say, look, there's got to be a better way. And I said, yes, there is. Let's run a query and group these students together and then add the contact for all these students at one time. And we probably saved her at least 45 minutes of data entry, because the way she was doing it, one student at a time, that would have taken her every bit of an hour to add these contacts. Using queries and adding them as a group, she did it in probably about 5 minutes. So it cut out a lot of data entry time. Queries can be used to work on APR. So how do we use a query to work on APR? I worked with a lot of grants where the director says the counselors are responsible for updating APR fields for their students, not all students. Okay, so I'm a counselor. It's time to work on the APR. I need to select just my students because I don't want to see John's students. I just want to see mine. So I'll run a query using counselor dropdown, select my students. Now I can update just my students' APR fields. That's one way a query can be used to work on the APR. Now, who benefits from using queries? Counselors or anyone who is tasked with updating student data should have a good understanding on how to set up a query in your database. Queries will save you a lot of data entry time, so learning how it works in your database will benefit you. Directors can use queries to select a certain cohort or a certain population for comparison over several reporting years. I want to talk about, or I will talk about that more later, comparisons over several reporting years. This is a concept that I kind of came up with, I don't know, 2 years ago, where we could take a 5-year grant cycle and let's look at all your data from each year and compare them. If your database, I'm not sure about all, but I know one particular database allows you to compare from year to year. And it really helps to identify what's working and what's not working. One year you may have every senior enrolled in post-secondary education. What happened that year that allowed us to get every senior to enroll versus the next year, only 2 out of 25 enrolled? What's the difference? What changed? So this allows you to kind of monitor what's going on from year to year and make changes. It's a 5-year grant cycle. You can do poorly in one year and you can do great in another. Why did we do poorly in that one year? So let's compare. And that's kind of what we're doing with queries. All right. There's my airplane. How do you run a query? All right, first, what does it mean to run a query? Before you can run a query, you need to know what information you want as the output. Now, when I say the output, that means on the screen or to the printer, the output. Now, the criteria, that's what we talked about earlier. The criteria is what you use to select the data, the information. That would be the fields, okay? You may want to see a list of participants that are in the same grade or same school or a certain GPA or all of it. Once you know what information you want as the output, then you must select the field or fields that will produce the information from the field selections. So again, this is the criteria. When I say select the field, we're selecting the criteria. And that is pretty much how you run a query. Now, each database is going to be a little different. The one thing I would recommend is if you don't have a good understanding of your database or running queries in your database, is contact your vendor and ask for some assistance. All right, let me move over to that. Now I'm going to show you an example of a query in my database. I am familiar with all the commercially available databases for TRIO, and I know that all the databases offer this feature. But as I said earlier, if you need to know how to run a query in the database your grant currently uses, call the support line. So let's take a look at some queries. Give me a second while I get my screen back. And I will okay, here we go. This is my database that I'm going to show you guys how to run a query. What you're looking at here is a student overview list, okay? Now, right now, I have school selected, so I'm going to erase the school, get rid of that filter, because I want to see all the students listed. So this is the student overview that shows all the students. You can see the list here. Here's their names. Now, I'm going to scroll to the bottom, and I'm going to look at the number, 72. Again, I'm not sure about all databases, but if your database shows a number like this one, you want to pay attention to that number, because as you add a filter, this number is going to change. So you want to pay attention to that number. So let me scroll back up and select a filter. Now, the way we do it in this database is to select actions, filter, and I'm also would like to note queries should be simple. We're not computer people. We don't need to know SQL commands and things like that. It should be straightforward, like this. I'm going to select students based on school. All right, so I select school, and what do I want? I want the Empowered Demonstration High School. So I'm going to select that. Out of the 4 options I have, I'm selecting Empowered Demonstration High School. Click Apply. Okay, now I'm going to add another filter. This time it's going to be a grade level. So I click Student, current grade year, and I want to see the 10th graders that go to that particular school. So I click Apply, and I'm going to scroll down and let you see the number. And we have 12. Out of 72 students, 12 of them go to Empowered Demonstration High School and are in the 10th grade, 10th grade. So current grade year is 10th grade. That is a query. Now, we can get more complex with queries. I can spend a lot of time in this database showing you how to do queries. This is a very simple query. It's just 2 fields or 2 criteria. We can go further with, okay, I want to see all the seniors at a particular high school that has not filled out a FAFSA. That's another good query. It's a little bit more complex. But this is a good example of a query. So I'm going to change my screen back to the presentation. All right. So that is what a query looks like. Your database has those abilities. Just if you don't know how to do it, call tech support. As I said, the key with queries is simplicity. Queries are incredibly important, so if you find it difficult to run a query in your database, you may want to contact your vendor for assistance or training. Databases is a collection of a lot of data. I mean, we have lots and lots of student records. If you don't know how to run a query, then guess what? Every time you print a report of, let's just say, a list of students, you're going to get every student in that database. And then you have to sort through them all. So that's why you want to learn the queries. Let's say we're updating some APR fields. We don't want to have to go through the students that we're not working with. We want to query out just the students we're working with. I've worked with a lot of grants that they would divide up the students based on counselor. The director says each counselor is responsible for their own APR for their students. So queries came in very useful for that. And that is an example of my query. Here we go. For example, I want to see a list of 10th grade participants that go to a particular school. This is how you would do it in your database. So look for the grades field, the grade, whatever it's labeled, a grades field. Select the 10th grade. Then find the field that lists the schools. That would probably be listed as schools. Select the school you want in the output. And then again, when I say output, I mean the screen or the printer. And then the example above is a simple query. More detailed information you want, the output, the more complex the query can get. And again, they can get very, very complex. Just depends on what information you're looking for. We can run queries across multiple screens. You have one screen that has 45 fields. I can select 2 fields, the criteria on this screen. Then I can move to another screen and select more fields. So it's not just one field I can select from, or one screen I can select from. I can select from many different screens. That's where the complexity part gets a little crazy. But it's really interesting when you start running queries and you see the output. I mean, this is data. This is the real deal. We're not talking, I think I did great. The data shows you did great. So this is why we want to know the queries. All right, do we have any questions, Patricia?
So at this time, I would like to take a pause. This is a great time before we go further. And if you have anything in particular, either about a filter or why, for instance, you would want to filter just your 10th grade students. Maybe you're doing a tutoring or test prep or something like that. Whether it's functional or technical, please put that in the Q&A box. To answer your question, Robbie, we don't have a question yet. Also, if you have any comments, I am also monitoring the chat. So we've got quite a few people here. Robbie, if it's all right with you, I'd like to take this time to ask every attendee to perhaps think about something you'd like your system to do or that you don't know how to do. And if you put that in the Q&A or something you want covered, then we can go ahead and review that during this session. We would rather it be helpful to your particular questions than just go on about what we think, because we've got lots of ideas, but you folks are the ones that are in the field and would have to do a query. And also, I realize I didn't introduce myself. So for those of you that don't already, that don't already know me, my name is Patricia Mohammed. I Director of Strategic Initiatives at COE, and I'm happy to be here with all of you. So if we have no comments or questions or specific data inquiries that you have, I'm going to go ahead and turn it. Okay, we have a, I'm going to go ahead and read it, Robbie. It went in the chat box, but what are the best queries to have for your data when it comes to hopefully renewing your 5-year grant? So that's a really good question. And I would go ahead, Robbie, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is where the running analysis over multiple years, you can see if you're looking at targeted schools, things like that, you can see which schools produced maybe the better students. But I think the queries that would work best when rewriting for a grant, I strongly think that you need to look at the entire grant cycle. Now, we all know PE points are calculated on years 2, 3, and 4. We know that. We don't necessarily have to go with just years 2, 3, and 4, even though those are the ones that matter. Let's go with all 5 years. And but yeah, I would more than likely use data from each year to determine when we rewrite. That might have some bearings on how you rewrite or what you put in the proposal. That's just my suggestion. So I don't think 1 year would really give you enough information to make determinations on how to write a proposal for a new grant. It's just 1 year data. We're a 5-year grant cycle. So let's look at all the 5 years and see what areas you guys came in strong. Again, PE points, it measures your performance. Look at the PE points over the 5 years. What is there a particular PE point that you didn't do well in? You barely made it, or you just zoomed by it. And then we know what areas to work in, to work harder on. So hope that answers your question.
I have another question, and I'm going to go ahead and read that to you, Robbie.
Okay.
This is from Giovanna Alexandra. If I'm pronouncing that right, if not, please forgive me. Question. I would love automated reports from the database that allows us to see the number of students contacted, services received, engagement, etc., on a weekly basis.
Yes. So automated reports. Let's say when you say automated, to me it's done automatically. There are no, unless they've come up with something new. I'm familiar again with all the databases out there. There is no database that does automated reports that I'm familiar with, unless something new has come up. But the contact report basically is what you're referring to. Contacts is really a good area to master the queries. And I'd like to talk more about that. But again, the contact. So if I'm a counselor and I'm working with 40 students, I want to see the student that I have not contacted. Let's say I want to see the students who have not contacted in a given week. Because that's the falling through the crack that I hear from grants. You know, we haven't seen the student in months or weeks. So when you're working with contact data, if you're a counselor, you certainly do need to master queries, because you need to be able to go into your database and tell the database, show me all the students that I met with in the month of January. Show me all the students that I've met with more than 3 times in the month of January or in the semester. We can put time frames on there. We can put, 3 contacts or more, things like that. So, and services. Now, again, certain grants are required to provide certain services. Let's take seniors from a UV grant. We'd like to have all seniors go to a college visitation, okay? We have a lot of seniors, so we can't take them all at the same time. So I'll run a report. Show me all seniors who have not been or received a college visitation contact or event. You would use queries to find that information out. So I hope that answers your question.
And do you mind, Robbie, if I jump in?
Nope, not at all.
So, Giovanni, another thing I was thinking, you may not have meant this at all, but one thing that we can do is not necessarily automate a query, but save the report. So every time you go in to the system, the things you want to look for can appear. And I'm just going to share my screen for a second, Robbie, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so for example, I know that Robbie had showed you how to do a query, but let's say, because you asked for something automated, you automatically want to see every morning when you go into your home screen, the students that had their last enrollment note or their last service recorded, maybe all your disabled students, anything like that. You can actually save these reports that have those filters and query for you. So we've got like the canned reports, right? And then as Robbie had showed you, you can see things arranged by school. But let's say you want to do your own report and then save it. And this is kind of, I'm hoping, what you mean by automated. Let's say I want to not look at cohort, right? So I'm gonna move this out of the way. I don't want to see this either. I actually only want to see current status, right? So I'm gonna put that right at the very top. And let's say I don't want to see the school, as the example that Robbie gave. If I hit apply, you notice this? So now what I wanted to see, the filter I wanted to see, and again, everything, and it depends on your database, but with COE, we're gonna of course show you the COE database. You can actually sort and filter through the columns. So now I want to save this. So I'm going to go ahead so that every morning, and I hope this captures your automated question, I'm going to save this report. I'm going to call it, and I thank you for forgiving me for mispronouncing your name. And now by memory, I'm going to call, I hope I'm spelling this right, Otherwise, Giovanni, I'll call you after. I'm going to save this. I'm going to make it public. And all that means is that my colleagues can look at my fabulous report if they want it. Now, every time I go home, I am going to see the Giovanni report, right? So I'm going to see the filters I wanted to see. And again, like Robbie demonstrated, you can actually add a whole bunch of filters, and it kind of allows you to just have this done for you. And then if you want to export it to Excel, right? All you do is you just hit Excel.
Right.
A couple of questions for you, Robbie, before we resume.
Yep.
So,
okay.
And also check your text box. Anonymous attendee, we have an Access database that we built from scratch. It's working great. We know how to write our own queries, etc. We use it for more than just Trio programs, and it is getting full, meaning over 7,000 participants and lots of data for each. Do you think it's time for us to look at a commercial database product, or should we make small updates to what we have? So, Robbie, I don't know if you had a chance to check out that.
Yeah, I think it's a commercial database. Well, Access is okay. Homegrown databases, I've dealt with them many, many times. Your issues you're going to run into is development. If you need to make some changes to the database, do you have someone who can make those changes? I'm not a huge fan of them because I think personally that the homegrown databases, there's too much room for error. And I'm going to talk about accuracy. What's the point of having a database if it's not producing accurate data? You're going against what you're trying to do. You're trying to produce good data so you can show the grant's doing well. So to answer your question, yeah, I think you guys are strapped for time. You've got 1,000 things going on. The last thing you need to be responsible for is, oh my gosh, database isn't working. Let's figure out how to fix it. Man, lack of a better word, screw that. I would call tech support. I love tech support. So that's the benefit of having a commercially available database. You have tech support. You got people on your side. You've got people who know the ins and outs of the database, whereas in an Access database, and I have actually, when you say a lot of data, this is a true story. I was working as an independent contractor here in Houston, and I was doing a job for a law firm, an attorney. Wasn't really a law firm, it was an attorney. Anyways, he calls me up. He says, man, he goes, I don't know what's going on with my server. I can't access it. He has an Access database. I get there, his Access database crashed, completely dead. All his data was in that database. He's like, man, I got to have that data. Well, I was able to recover it. It cost him a lot of money because I don't work for free. But Access isn't the best database. It's an entry-level database. It's one file. You have an MDB file. What happens if that MDB file gets corrupt? Your entire database is corrupt. So Access is, again, entry-level. I would not put anything in an Access database that I'm relying on for stability. I put my cooking recipes in Access for sure, but would I put student data in it's not secure, first off. The Access, yeah, okay, we can talk about, well, we got it locked down. Okay, sure. We can break into those. When you move up from Access, you're going to you go SQL is good, but then you got the granddaddy of them all. We've got Oracle. These two big players in the database arena, they bring security, they bring stability. It's just a better platform to have data that that's important. So I tell people this all the time. If you don't really care about the data, it's not that important, sure, Access works great. But if you need stability, and also keep in mind, unless Microsoft changed a few things, your Access database is one file, MDB file. And unless something's changed, once that MDB file grows bigger than 2 gigs, it's not hard to do, your Access database will come to a halt. It will start crashing on you. So if you notice in the database, your Access database crashing, you've got too much data. So how do you fix that? Well, guess what? Start over. You have to start over. What I mean, brand new MDB file, start from scratch, 0 records, or go into your database, your Access database with 2 gigs of data, and start deleting. We don't like that word delete in Trio because we want to maintain records as long as we need to in case we get audited. Okay, so deleting is not necessarily the best thing to do. So in my opinion, an Access database is good for quick. If you're a Trio and you want to create your own little Access database for whatever reason, that's fine, but not if you're using it for your APR. So I think that was the long version of my answer. So.
And I'd like to jump in there. Folks, and I think it's the same person, the anonymous attendee that followed up with the second question. If you're going to ask me if you're going to ask us our honest opinion, yeah, we think there are a lot of benefits to using a system that's already available, right? So while, as Robbie mentioned, if you have your Access, you're having to create queries and things like that. But wouldn't it be nice to be able to have a bulletin board to connect with your staff at the same place? Wouldn't it be nice to, I want to send a text directly to just this school student or the parents or the 9th graders, and have one place for everything. So while Access is terrific, if you're going to ask me, is something that's available, and I'm not going to call COE commercial because we're a nonprofit, if you could automatically do that or sync your services calendars right to your album, it would save a lot of time. So we've got we've got a follow-up, and if it's all right with you, Robbie, I believe it's the same person. So there are, so you're using FileMaker. So I think this is a different anonymous person because the other person's using Microsoft Access. Okay, so major differences. I would love to actually go over the differences between the 3 programs that you listed at the second interval for questions, because I just want to make sure that we cover, that Robbie is able to cover the general data presentation, just in case other specifically have something that's general. So we're going to come back to this at the next question and answer. I'm not going to mark it answered. So Robbie, would that work for you? Do you want to proceed, and then we'll catch this one?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to go through the presentation. Yeah. So there we go.
Sorry about that.
All right. Okay, so let's get back to the database management tips. All right, the output of the queries displayed on the screen. Let's see, it allows the editing of fields for the selected group of students and can also be printed. It is important to remember to run a query. The data must be entered into the database. I know that might sound silly, but I have received calls where they said, we want to see this particular information, and where is it at in the database? Well, we don't have it entered yet. It's got to be entered before we can run a query against it. So you have to enter the data in the database before we can run queries. It's also worth mentioning you cannot run a query against the notes field. These are memo fields. Databases do not have the ability to run queries against notes fields unless you write a special query command. That's not what we're doing here. We want to be a point and click query. We're not wanting to write queries or SQL commands. Reports in databases are dynamic. And what does that mean? If you run a report showing a list of students in the 10th grade, then close the report, then add more students to the 10th grade, run the same report, you'll see the newly added students. That again might sound silly, but it has come up many times. Do I have to do something special to the report to make it see the new students? No, you don't. Okay. And there we go. Second objective, how to measure the performance of your grant using data. So grants have two areas where performance can be measured. Internal performance, basically goals that are usually set by the director and aligned with the type of grant, UVETS, etc. This can include staff performance. APR performance, annual performance report, is the data sent to the Department of Education. So we know that is a must do. You don't have any options. You have to submit an APR, whereas the internal performance, not required, but it's nice. All right, let's get past the second objective. Some grants have internal goals set, not all. As I said, it's not a requirement. The goals are usually set by the director, aligned with the grant UVETS. This can also include staff performance. Examples of internal goals. Participants must receive X number of contacts in a certain time frame. That could be a goal set by the director. This prevents students from slipping through the crack. All student data, including contacts, must be updated by the end of the day, or end of the day Friday. That is an internal goal. In order for the director to monitor and manage the grant, the data has to be in the database. And I have worked with grants where counselors enter their contact data once a month. That's a lot of time, wasted waiting for this data to be entered. 80% or better attendance by participants to TRIO events. This includes recruiting. This is important. If your students aren't turning up for your events, we got to look at what's causing this. Staff performance, how many contacts were made in a certain time frame. So if you wanted to kind of get an overview of the staff and what they're doing, how many contacts are being made, perhaps you can put some sort of a performance bonus out there. Whoever has the most contacts in a certain time frame, I don't know, gets a free Starbucks coffee or something. So staff performance. And these are just a few examples. None of this is required by the Department of Education. It's just something some grants do. All the grants above can be checked via reports using queries. All the databases have built-in reports. Look through the reports, looking for anything related to contacts, and again, you may need to call tech support for assistance with the queries. Okay. All grants submit an APR to the Department of Education. So you want to check your APR throughout the year, not 2 weeks before the submission deadline. Believe it or not, this happens a lot. Entering the data in your database for your APR shouldn't be difficult using queries. So if you're finding that it's taking you a long time to enter data in your APR, contact the vendor. By starting it throughout or by running through your APR throughout the year, this allows you ample time to collect the missing data and enter it in the database. Most grants I've worked with, this is, the time-consuming part is collecting the missing data. Checking APR data can be done directly in the APR, and also remember to check your PE points as well. I also want to point out that, as you guys may know, your PE points are being fed from your APR field or fields. So if you look at your PE points and your numbers aren't looking good, update your APR fields and then go back to your PE points. I would get the call every now and then, beginning of the fiscal year, just roll over the database, PE points aren't looking good. That's because you haven't updated APR fields. Once the APR fields are updated, then your PE points percentages will change, hopefully in your favor. So PE points, APR are all tied in together. And it's important that you update APR first before you look at your PE points. You can't update PE points. You update APR fields, and that feeds your PE points. All right, so that's how that works, and that should be like that in every database. All right, so one way to measure performance over several reporting years, we talked about this earlier. Grants have a 5-year grant cycle. Take data from the 2 years or all 5 years of the grant cycle to measure performance. An example would be, what is the percentage of seniors who graduated from year to year? Or it could just be what percentage of students progress from year to year. What is the percentage of graduates that enrolled in PSC from year to year? So again, going back to what I said, you can build over a 5-year grant cycle. You can build kind of like, I guess, an analysis that shows year 2 we struggled, year 3 was great. All seniors enrolled in PSC. So what was the difference? What changed? The percentage of participants who dropped the program from year to year. That's a huge one. You don't want students dropping. It goes against the PE points. So you want to pay attention to this, or really all of it, because it all can help you make better decisions on the direction of your grant. So what do we need to work harder at? What areas do we need to concentrate on, focus on? Maybe a particular staff member is just not pulling the weight. All of this will kind of tell you that story. So data is actually telling a story. And this is what I love about data. You just have to learn to read the data, and it will tell you what's going on. All right. The next, third objective, data entry tips. So the accuracy of your database depends a lot on you. If data is not being entered or updated correctly, you will not get accurate numbers. Now, I would like to add, because of this homegrown database, that I have seen some pretty strange things happen in homegrown databases. That's why I'm not a fan of them. They're unstable. You can enter information in a field, run a report. That field shows up in the report, but the data's not there. So what happened to that data? That's a scary thought, because when you enter data in a field, then you print it, you expect to see that data. You want to pay attention to that. Your database may tell you your PE points look horrible, but it's only because APR fields haven't been updated or updated correctly. Remember, APR fields is what determines PE points. All right. So, of course, we want to focus on APR fields. However, there are many non-APR fields that's important to the grant. Establishing good data entry skills is key. Some examples, and I hit the mouse too soon, sorry. Let me go back. When updating one particular APR field for many participants, try to group those participants in one list by running a query. This helps with data accuracy. How? Because I'm not having to scroll through 50 students to get to the student that I'm looking for. It's so easy to click on the wrong one and update that field for the wrong student. When you isolate or group the participants when you're updating a particular field, this helps with data accuracy. All right. Try to do the data entry during a quiet time, because I hear this a lot. It's hard to update the database because I have phones calls, students are walking in, or counselors are bothering us. You know, it's just a lot of stuff going on. You guys are pretty slammed. So try to enter data during a quiet time, early. I think, I'm an early bird, so 6:30, 7 o'clock, get your data entry done for the day, and you're done. Set a certain time. This is also incredibly important for APR. All right, what I've told grants and trainings is that it's a good idea to take a particular day, say every Friday we work on the APR. And it doesn't have to be throughout the year, but let's just say 2 months before the APR submission. So get some sort of a schedule on data entry. As I mentioned earlier, staff performance. All contact data must be entered by end of day on Friday. Okay. Standardize on case when adding student records or updating the drop-down list. This is a huge pet peeve of mine, because I'll see reports and we'll have the city in uppercase and we'll have the student's name in proper case, and it just looks horrible. So standardize on a case when you're adding a student. Some people add a student, they want to go uppercase with first name, last name. Other ones add students, and they're going to go proper case. Well, then you get a student listing report, and you have upper, lower. You know, it just doesn't look good. So standardize on a case when you're updating drop-down list. Now, let's talk real quick about the drop-down list editing. Be very, very careful modifying pull-downs. You just want to make sure whatever you're doing to that pull-down list doesn't affect a report, because remember, reports are coming from drop-downs, and this could become an issue. And all right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, what data do you enter into the database? APR data, of course, contact data, student's address, parents' information, participants' favorite sport, participants' educational goals, personal goals. These last two, I think, really help keep the students engaged. Why would I need to track the favorite sport? Well, let's say we want to have a watch party. We need to get these students into an event. Maybe we want to talk about financial aid. What's the best way to get kids in? Tell them we're going to watch football and eat pizza. They're there. And then you can slide in your FAFSA applications and things like that. So to get them to show up, we can do things like, you know, having a watch party for a favorite sporting event. Learning or tracking their goals, you can help them stay on track. Personal goals, educational goals. You have an education plan. The student, ninth grader, says, you know, I want to be an IT guy. Well, then you can say, okay, for that, we have set some educational goals for you. And this is what you have to achieve if that's what you want to do. So that helps you help them stay accountable. This is not anything to do with your APR, but it has everything to do with getting the students in, graduating, and enrolled in college. At least it should help. If you want to enter any data that you consider important and would like to track, be smart about data collection and only enter data that is important. Don't go overboard with this data entry stuff. A lot of grants, they just want to enter every little thing. The database gets a little crowded, so to speak, and it's kind of hard to sort through all that data. So always sit down with the director or staff and say, look, you know, I think we should track personal goals. Then one of the first things you got to do, if you say, okay, everybody's in agreement, where do we put that in the database? This is very important. Where do you put it? If we're decided as a staff, as a group, that we want to track educational goals, then as a group, we need to make sure we agree on where that data is being entered. Some databases have a particular place for goals, some do not. So it's incredibly important that everybody knows where that data is being entered. So you don't enter it in two different places. When you start entering data that's basically the same in two different fields, now I can promise you your numbers will not be correct, because you have data that's basically the same, but in two different fields. So when I run a report, I'm running against this field, I'm not going to see all my numbers. So this is why it's important to determine where to enter in the database. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. This is my last objective, and we should be good. Fourth objective, why a properly configured database is very important. Databases require to have certain information entered during the initial setup. It's important that these parameters are set according to your grant. What do I mean by that? Funded to serve. You have P points, right? Your number one is your funded to serve. So you need to enter that number in your database. Director's name, PR award number. That's part of your APR, so you have to enter that in the database. So there's a lot of information that has to be entered in the initial setup. Once it's entered, that should be it for that 5-year grant cycle. So grants follow the fiscal year, so databases must be set to the correct fiscal year. If your grant reports certain services, you want to make sure all those services are being reported. This is, again, very important. Grants are assigned a PR award number. A number should be entered in the database, and this is usually done in the administration screen. So find that screen and just go through the fields. If you have questions, call the vendor and get them to answer those questions. Be very careful in making changes to the pull-down list. As I said earlier, you should never modify an APR field. This APR field comes from the Department of Education. No one in TRIO determines if we're going to report or if we're going to change the gender field. The Department of Ed determines that, okay? You can add what you want, and some databases allow you to update and change APR fields, but if you change, let's just say, I don't know, gender field, and you report something that's not allowed by the Department of Ed, it'll get kicked back because the Department of Ed checks the gender field and says, no, there is no such thing as a 6. Because as you guys know, when you report the APR, it's numbers. So we have a 1 or a 2. We don't have a 4. All right, so you either need to be a 1 or 2. So that's what happens when you update APR fields. Those non-allowed options in that APR field can get on your APR. And when you upload your APR to the Department of Ed, you'll have a lot of red checks and red X's, which are your validations. So try to stay away from modifying any APR fields. If you're not sure if a particular field is an APR field, call tech support. All right, that's it, guys. Oh, wait. I got to have my music. All right, so that's the blues music. All right, so thank you guys for showing up. And if you have any questions, my email is right here, robbie.vassar@coenet.org. Don't put a period at the end, my mistake. Patricia,
Yes.
You are it.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and answer the question from the last time. And also, I'd like to tell the group that you will receive a copy of this recording. So if you didn't write down robbievassar@coenet.org, you're going to get a copy of the PowerPoint as well, Robbie. So we're actually going to send out the most recent version of the PowerPoint. If you're interested in Empower specifically, you can reach out to COE, you can reach out to Robbie, you can reach out to coenet.org. Now, to the question from before, rather than take your time in going through the merits of each, I'm going to just give you a quick list that I know that Empower does that other systems don't. One of the major differences that Empower has is, it's a couple. It's the archiving the data. So in other words, whenever you go into a student record and put a new phone number, you will not have to rewrite or capture again information that you put in before, say, the cell phone got disconnected. Other quick things. College applications. I think the grid and the ability to do these queries and automated reports and all that stuff is great. But it's also nice to be able to track all of your college applications, track your financial aid, quickly do reports that show all of your reportable services for a student. Another one, the amount of work that you have to do. Empower is Oracle based. It's pretty sophisticated. You click on an icon, it takes you to that function. You don't have to go to multiple screens to get where you are. If you're on a calendar item, if you're on a service and you want to go to a student that attended a service, you can basically click on that student from anywhere that you are in the system and go to that screen. So you don't have to go to multiple screens. I'm in an event and I can do reports. Lastly, the APR function, I think, is a little bit more sophisticated, both in Upward Bound and Talent Search, because you get the same grid system that you get throughout, and I don't want to do a demo throughout Empower. So you're able to fluctuate, to catch errors before you ever export it to an Excel. Other stuff is similar. I'm pretty sure at this point everyone can do text, emails. Robbie, being that you had so many years with Bloomin', I'd like to hand this over to you, because you uniquely could mention some differences that Empower has in regards to Bloomin'.
Some differences. We have Empower has some really nice features that I find is more time saving. One, and this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in the Trio database, is what I call real-time APR correction. Real time. What is it? So I know how Bloomin' does it. I know how Student Access does it. And if you have a FileMaker Pro, I'm pretty sure I know how you're doing it. Or homegrown database. Let me rephrase. Homegrown database. I'm pretty sure I know how you're doing it. Let's address the homegrown databases first. You guys, what you do, if you're even using your database for the APR, you might just have an Excel file. You're at the mercy of the Department of Ed. What does that mean? That means you have to wait till they open their website to upload your Excel file to see if you have any errors. They're the ones checking for your errors, because if you did it manually, yes, man, 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s, and we've got rows and columns, and we have an Excel file with 300 records. No, thank you. I'm going to sit there for weeks. No. What we've done in Empower is created what I call a real-time APR data check. So if you change a particular APR field in Empower, it checks it real time, automatically, with the other fields that it's related to. As you guys know, field 27, participant status, is new. You can't have field 34 saying continuing. They don't match. That's what they call the, forget the error that's referred to in the Department of Ed. I can't think of the name now. But you can't have it. So what happens with Empower, if I change a participant status, let's say from new to continuing, then Empower is going to say, hey, if you do this, then you have to change this field and this field and this field. Whereas in the other databases, you can do it. I can change participant status from new to continuing and save it, and that's it. I'm fine. Then guess what? You upload the Department of Ed. You upload the Excel file to the Department of Education. Then the Department of Education tells you, hey, Robbie, you can't have John as a new participant in field 27 and have him as a continuing participant in 34. All right, so Empower is real time, and that is huge, because even with Upper Bound, or even with Bloomin' and Student Access, they do have checks available, but you have to actually go run the check. All right, you have to manually go do it. And that's, one of the things that I would get hit at trainings, like, you guys don't run your APR. Well, we got to go to the APR. We got to run the verified data, blah, blah, blah. We don't want to do it. All right, don't worry. Don't have to do it. You have Empower. You change the participant status. It does the checks right there. So before you're even able to close and save, you have to change those fields. So this is a time saver times 10, because you guys live and die by the APR. And that is something that is huge. So the idea behind submitting an APR is the Department of Ed opens their website November 1st. You upload your APR file November 1st. Experience, I have worked with grants submitting an APR the day before the deadline. The Department of Ed's servers are getting hammered so hard with all these submissions, they crash. The servers actually crash, and that's the Department of Ed side. And this is not, I'm not exaggerating. I've seen this happen many times. And you're at the mercy of the Department of Ed. So having your APR done immediately is a great idea. So how do you have it done immediately? Well, with Empower, you just read the messages, you update the fields as the Empower is telling you to do it, and you're done. The others, you do have to go into the APR. You do have to manually run stuff. It's time consuming. So that's one of the biggest difference. The way we deal with contacts, we call them events. I love the fact that you can actually send these contacts to your Outlook. So let's say I'm setting up a contact for a student, and I want that in my Outlook calendar. You can actually send it, and I live and die by Outlook. These other applications, yeah, we have a calendar, but it doesn't remind you. So what's the point of having it on a calendar if the calendar is not telling you you have a contact coming up in 3 hours? I need a reminder. So those two differences there are huge, in my opinion, and the stability.
Sorry, Robbie, I've got a couple of questions in the chat box. I just want to make sure we cover them. So the first question is from Lawrence. Can you migrate data from Bloomin to Empower? Yes, you can. It's actually really simple. What we did was we enabled you to either import it yourself in mass, in a mass upload with a template, or I know that we've got users that say, I know we can do it ourselves. We don't want to do it. Will you do it for us? We'd rather pay you. Well, yeah, if you don't want to do the template, yeah, we're a nonprofit. Sure, we'll take your money and do it for you. And then, Robbie, this question I think is directly for you. This is from Christina Garza, and it says, I don't think it's called a query in Bloomin. What do they call it? A report, a list? So I'll let you know.
No, it's referred to as a query because basically in Bloomin, you're selecting students based on the criteria, so gender and grade level. A query is kind of universal. Any database, you can run a query in Excel. It's very complicated to do, but you can do it. So a query is kind of like the universal word that says, in a database with millions of records, I just want the ones that have a particular gender, a particular grade level, that go to a particular school. That's a query. Now that is exactly what you do in Bloomin when you're using the drop downs, the gender drop down. And again, watch the numbers, but that is a query. And then, of course, the query, what do you do to the output? The output is on the screen, of course. Now, from there, I can send it to the printer, or I can just update fields. One more thing, I think, I was thinking with Empower, the difference, there was something that I had and I wanted to mention. Go ahead, Patricia, it'll come to me. I'm getting old. I forgot.
Actually, we don't have another question, but I'd like to take this time to, again, if you've got any comments, we're going to send you a copy of both the PowerPoint and a recording as long as you're registered. I want to give another shout out to Giovannia because Giovannia and I just had a conversation and I totally blanked out, I think in the last week or so. So I'm going to ask her publicly to forgive me butchering her name. And also, anyone that has other COE questions, whether it's about policy that's coming up in March or anything like that, or other PD events, you know, feel free to reach out. I concur with Robbie about being able to sync your services with Outlook. When you are in your calendar and you're looking at your events, the ability to have events with reportable services, whether it's test prep, tutoring, monthly stipend, the ability to just sync that with either your Outlook or your Google Calendar is a wonderful thing in my book, and you can actually choose what you want to sync. I'm not going to sync it live because this is my personal computer and Outlook is not there. But it's a feature that that's.
And I've tested it out. It works great. It works great. And you can't do that with any other databases. And, you know, let's face it, again, TRIO grants are strapped for time. We have this motto, we do more work with less staff. So having the ability to send a contact, so I've got contacts lined up for the next month. I'm sending all those contacts to my Outlook calendar. And guess what? My Outlook is on my cell phone. So now I have no worries. I need to check who I'm supposed to see next week. I pull up my cell phone and here's my Outlook, and now I can see who I'm seeing. So but I'm going back to that APR stuff, man. I have spent way too many hours on phone calls with you guys doing APR stuff. And we're doing this one click at a time business. It's, gosh, man. And then we get to something that says, okay, 45 students is missing this data. What? 45? Wow. And I'm like, okay, well, have fun with that, guys. You know, this doesn't happen with Empower because it checks it real time. I mean, that to me that's huge. So, anyways.
Another question. So
yep.
This question is, you said this is one of 4 parts of the data. So yes, you are correct. There are 3 more set. We have an April date, and we're probably going to have a March and June date. The dates haven't been finalized. I expect that they will be finalized in the next week or so. And at that moment, you can always check on the COE website for any new professional development for, for proposal writing workshops, anything like that. It will all be there. So the date hasn't been released, but can I ask the anonymous person, I think there's 2 who that is. I would just love to give a shout out and follow up with you. It's so weird to talk to an anonymous person. So if you're not shy, that is, if it's not a secret, and definitely make sure that you get the list of the remaining data webinars. I want to thank everyone for your time. I love, thank you for, I asked regarding, okay. Thank you so much. Now I see your name. It was weird before it said anonymous. So I appreciate that. And I'm happy actually, Hareem, to give you a more detailed list of differences. I just want to be mindful that, everyone is on this webinar. So I definitely would love to follow up with you. Both mine and Robbie's contact information is on the COE website. If you go to the staff page, you can find our emails. And that's all I have. Robbie, any closing words before we stop the recording?
No, I do not. So I just want to thank everybody that showed up, and I hope you learned something. If you're more confused than when you began, then I'm sorry. Send me an email. I'll confuse you even more. Now, you have my email. If you have any questions on just general tips and tricks, I mean, I'm not going to go into training mode with you guys on particular databases, but yeah, I mean, I think at this point in time, to be a homegrown database, that's old school stuff, man. I mean, it's time to move on. It's time to graduate to the big leagues and get a commercially available database. But it's just like buying a car. You got to make sure all those features are there that you use the most. What do you guys use the most? APR. You want to make sure your PE points are there. With a good APR, good PE points, guaranteed funding, of course, unless you write a really bad proposal for a grant. But you have to maintain good APR data and good PE points. So it's incredibly important to make sure your database is going to do that. And also, this is what I wanted to say earlier. The homegrown databases. I was at a conference many years ago, and a person comes up and is talking about Blooming, and he says, I have a database that I developed myself, and it's kick butt, it's all this. I said, okay, well then let's have a race. Let's just do something that
overbound grants do, and you add it in yours and I'll add it in mine, and let's do finishes first. That's where it's at. It's the efficiency. So if you have a database and it's taking you 20 minutes to add group contacts, it's not a good database. It needs to be fast. It needs to be boom, 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 you're done. And I think I'm about to get cut off, so I got to shut up.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Madavone. Please reach out to COE with any questions. We really appreciate you being here. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, Robbie.